So this tweet went viral recently. A CEO said he's never met a top performing CEO who likes the role of HR. Said they're just there to slow things down and create meaningless process. 27,000 views, bunch of people agreeing with him. And here's the thing, he's probably right about the HR he's experienced. But that's the problem. What he's described isn't what HR is supposed to be. It's what HR became when people like him decided it wasn't worth investing in. I'm Clay. I have my master's in human resource development. I've rebuilt HR departments from the ground up across multiple industries. And what I want to walk you through today is why that tweet, that exact mindset, is a big part of why the job market feels so broken right now. Why your pay hasn't kept up, why work feels like it doesn't reward effort. It's because those in charge of building the system don't understand it and aren't incentivized to. And I know the internet's full of takes on this. Companies are greedy, HR is gatekeeping, job descriptions are impossible on purpose so they have an excuse not to hire. I get why people think that. But I've been inside these departments, I've seen what's actually going on. And it's not a conspiracy. It's more disappointing than that. 1 in 4 unemployed Americans right now, 1.8 million people according to CNBC, have been job searching for over 6 months, a result of a broken job market and the inability to match skills to meaningful employment. So let me walk you through what's going on and why we're here. For the majority of companies, payroll accounts for 60 to 70% of operating costs. That makes employees the biggest line item for most organizations. So the function responsible for managing that, the business unit responsible for maximizing that competitive advantage through strategic design of how you hire, how you pay, how you develop, how you manage talent, that should be one of the most strategically important roles in the building, right? According to the research, yes. A researcher named Hewlett looked at nearly 1,000 companies, the ones that had structured HR practices, real job analysis, comp-tied performance, actual training systems. They had lower turnover, higher productivity, and made more money. Measured across industries, data to reinforce the theories. The basic idea is that your competitive advantage comes from building human capital that's hard to copy. That's what HR is supposed to do. Design the system that generates a sustained competitive advantage. An example taught in business schools on competitive advantage is Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines started in 1971 with 3 planes serving 3 Texas cities, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. 3 planes, 3 cities, and a tight flight schedule to keep. Their VP of ground operations came up with a plan. Turn every plane around in 10 minutes. Land, unload, clean, reload, and get back in the air before competitors were even done boarding. That 10-minute turnaround saved the company. By 1973, they were profitable and didn't post another loss until COVID. 10-minute turnarounds were the business strategy. To make that happen, HR builds the human resource strategy on that. On this chart that I've used with the executives, HR's role starts in the purple to make sure the HR strategies can build that sustainable advantage. For Southwest, that means gate agents, ground crews, and flight attendants working together at a speed and coordination level no other airline was asking for. This affected who they hired, how Southwest trained them, their pay, and the culture that needed to be built to attract the right people to enact that philosophy and deliver those results. This is where I explain that half of my degree is math and the other half is psychology. I analyze a ton of data to ensure that numbers make sense. I also spend a lot of time thinking about how different situations and actions affect and drive people's behavior. Southwest had to build the entire human capital system to deliver on that competitive advantage and grow their airline. That's what strategic HR looks like. This part is forgotten in businesses now, where private equity and quarterly earnings focus on cost cutting and airlines rely on extra fees to drive revenue. Hewlett and Becker studied over 700 firms and found that companies with strong HR systems aligned to their business strategy had 63% higher market value than companies with weak HR. Let me say that again. Companies with strong HR systems aligned to business strategy had 63% higher market value than companies with weak HR. They found that improving a company's HR system by 1 standard deviation, for those who haven't taken a stats class, that just means moving from average to above average, was worth $41,000 per employee in shareholder wealth. The same shareholder wealth that teaches those in charge today to slash employees to increase shareholder value. So if you have 500 employees, that's a $20 million difference between an average HR function and a good one. They also found that some companies just improved compensation, better pay for performance, bonuses, incentive structures, and that helped, But the companies that built the full system, strategy alignment, implementation, organizational design, outperformed them. Because better comp is easy to copy. Strategic alignment imitation won't provide the same benefits to any company copying it. That's where the heart of the competitive advantage is built. Toyota is a clear example of this that's also taught in business school. Toyota's production system has been in place and studied for decades. Its success forced GM, Ford, and Chrysler to replicate it. They studied the Kanban cars, the quality circles, Kaizen, just-in-time manufacturing, and overall lean methodology. They created entire corporate initiatives to replicate what Toyota was doing, and they failed. Spear and Bowen spent 4 years studying over 40 Toyota plants for Harvard Business Review and found the competitors were copying the tools and missing the system. They couldn't replicate Toyota's competitive advantage because Toyota's advantage wasn't the production process. It was driven by the human capital investment that it relied on. Toyota invested in its workforce as its most significant corporate asset through developing a culture where every employee on the floor was expected to identify problems and experiment with solutions. The whole operation was designed so that human behavior drives continuous improvement, or Kaizen. This is how human resource development is implemented properly in organizations, and it's a lot harder than just checking a box. So let's talk about what's actually happening in these companies that are failing to imitate successful systems and strategies. If HR is that valuable, why does that CEO have 27,000 people agreeing with him that it just slows things down? 2 reasons, and they feed each other. First, the standard of expectations for HR was lowered. Compared to other functions managing the same level of financial responsibility, leading an HR department became relatively easy with a short certification. Not formal education in strategy, analytics, labor economics, or organizational behavior. Enough to check a box. Accessibility to the profession isn't bad by itself, but it created a massive range of capability under the same title. The words HR professional can mean very different things depending on who holds them. Lawler and Bedreau studied this in 2015. HR practitioners say they want to do strategy. Time use data shows the majority of their hours go to administration. The aspiration is there, but the capability distribution isn't. Second, and more importantly, executives hired based on a misunderstanding. They see HR as compliance. Necessary evil, a box to check so the company doesn't get sued. So they hire someone that checks those boxes and pay reflects that. That person does exactly what the job asked them to do and learn from the certification what that was supposed to look like. Most people do the job they were hired and resourced to do. The problem is the job that was defined for them and the lowered expectations set for them. And I've seen what this looks like up close. I took over one department where the person before me had a literal couch in their office as a focal point for their work. Employees would come in, sit down, and just vent about their manager, their co-workers, their day, and they'd sit there and listen like a therapist. Meanwhile, incomplete job descriptions, no comp structure, no performance management process, compliance issues everywhere. But the office had a couch and people had felt heard, so everyone thought HR was doing great. That's not HR. That's what happens when nobody in the building understands what the role is supposed to be. It was absorbing problems instead of solving them. And every time someone went to that couch instead of their manager, it made the actual management structure weaker. Managers stopped developing because they didn't have to. When I walk into something like that, my job is to reset the whole chain. I tell managers your employees' problems go through you. It's my job to make sure you do that legally and in line with strategy. I'm not the therapist, I'm not the party planner, and I'm not doing birthday cards. That gap between HR as a design function and HR as a checkbox, once it opens up inside a company, it spreads into everything. So let me contrast this against my approach to taking over an HR department and handling the compensation piece as an example. I'll start with a job analysis for every role in the organization. That means sitting down and connecting every role to what the organization is actually trying to accomplish. What does this role need to produce? What behaviors drive that? What qualifications actually predict success? And what does success look like? How are we going to measure that success? There's foundational research from Morgenstern and Campion showing that without this step, every HR decision downstream gets worse. Hiring, comp, performance management, all of it degrades without real job analysis underneath. From there, I build comp. And this is where most companies completely fall apart. What I usually see is someone pulling up salary.com or PayScale, finding a median for the job title in their zip code, and posting it as competitive pay. I've seen this inside massive organizations. This happens everywhere. Or worse, job comps found on Indeed are using a gut feeling based on previous hires for what they think the job is worth. The problem is you're using market data to replace analysis instead of feeding it into a model. I use something called the point factor method. I work with leadership to align what the company needs to reward and prioritize to achieve their strategic objectives. This could be things like education, experience, decision making, whatever matters for that specific business. Then I organize roles into job families, weigh the factors, assign point values, run a regression against real salary data to validate it. Then I build pay bands with enough room for real promotions, but not so much that more responsibility barely moves your paycheck. I also model total labor costs instead of just wages. So healthcare, retirement, PTO, holidays, payroll taxes, everything. And I benchmark all of that against Bureau of Labor Statistics data broken out by industry, geography, and company size. Because spending more per employee than your competitors doesn't help if your people don't value what you're offering. You have to match the comp strategy to who you're actually trying to attract. If you're spending a ton of money on family benefits in an organization for a workforce that primarily is comprised of young single males, like construction for example, you're going to lose quality workers to competitors that put that money into a higher base wage instead. Research from Rhines, Gerhardt, and Manette showed that how you structure pay matters as much as how much you pay. Structure drives behavior. When I bring this to executives and explain to them what we need to pay our workers, and usually we're not paying enough, I show them what it's costing them not to. Turnover has a real dollar amount through recruiting, lost productivity, training, and knowledge walking out the door through poor retention. Add up all of it and contrast it against the additional investment needed through higher wages and why the company makes more money by paying people more. I did this for a company where I built the entire HR department from nothing. I-9 compliance had them exposed to 6 figures in potential fines. I restructured their benefits, found they were paying premiums for people who didn't even work there anymore. Built their comp system, their training, their interview process, their leadership pipeline. Over $300,000 in documented first-year savings. Even through that, they still didn't view HR as a high-value, executive-level function worth investing in. I was underpaid, proved the worth of HR thinking I could change their mind, and unfortunately, all white men are stubborn in their ways, even when faced with hard data. And so I left. And that's how this plays out. Underinvestment in people leads to dissolving strategy and poor organizational outcomes for cost-saving initial benefit. So I'm sure if you're listening to me explain this, you intuitively understand the same thing. The question is then, why risk the organization's future for a short-term cost saving? Because the incentives are backwards. If you believe HR is just compliance, a necessary evil, the rational move is to spend as little as possible. You outsource it, hand it to a PEO, they do payroll, annual trainings, basic coverage, box checked, move on. A PEO handles payroll, filings, and has a hotline. It keeps you out of court. That's the ceiling. It's never going to build your job architecture or model labor costs or develop your next generation of leaders. Research from Adler and MIT Sloan Management Review showed that companies outsource HR for cost savings and risk transfer, not capability. And the ones that outsource broadly get worse workforce outcomes. Following our Southwest Airlines example, Ralph Kimmick, director of Southwest Airlines in 2003, said, quote, "It seems to me that once you do that, you're abdicating your role as an employer to lead your people." LePeck and Snell made a key point in 1999. Strategic HR should stay internal. Transactional stuff can go outside, but most companies outsource all of it because they can't tell the difference. The fact that this point was made 27 years ago and we've been watching the HR decline are not a coincidence. To see an example of how this affects companies in a clear negative light, we can look at healthcare and hospitals. Hospitals have been cutting nursing staff for years to save money. Then, when shortages hit, they pay travel nurses at rates that make the original savings look like a joke. The American Hospital Association reported that travel nurse billing rates went up 213% between 2019 and 2022. In Massachusetts alone, hospitals went from $204 million in temp nursing costs to $1.52 billion in 3 years, a 610% increase. And while all that cutting was happening, the research was showing that every additional patient you add to a nurse's workload increases the odds of that patient dying within 30 days by 16%. If Illinois hospitals had just staffed at a 4-to-1 ratio instead of 5 or 6-to-1, 1,595 deaths could have been avoided in a single year, and hospitals would have saved $117 million. Same pattern. Cut the people investment, pay more on the back end, lose people, sometimes literally. And now there's a new version of this happening everywhere, replacing workers with AI because the stock market rewards it. In July of 2025 alone, employers announced 62,000 job cuts, a 140% surge over July of 2024, with nearly half explicitly connected to AI and technological updates, according to Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. By May of 2026, over 128,000 tech workers had already been cut that year alone, averaging over 1,000 people per day. Bloomberg data showed that on average, large U.S. tech companies saw their stock rise 5.6% in the month after announcing layoffs. Meta cut over 20,000 workers in its year of efficiency, and its stock returned 194% that same year, its strongest annual performance on record. Amazon just announced 16,000 corporate cuts while operating its fastest AWS growth in 13 quarters. The incentive structure is clear. Cut people, stock goes up, CEO gets paid. Meanwhile, median CEO pay at the largest U.S. firms hit $22.2 million in 2023. The CEO to worker pay ratio sits at 281 to 1. And since 1978, CEO compensation has gone up over 1,000%, while typical worker pay went up 26%. CEOs are being rewarded by shareholders for cutting headcount and replacing people with automation. And that's almost certainly not the direction the HR leader in the room wanted to go in. It's a move that's universally hated by everyone except the people holding stock. The person who built the workforce strategy gets overruled by someone whose bonus is tied to completely different numbers. And this is where it affects everyone, because this dysfunction breaks the job market from the outside. Shareholders are dictating strategy. When HR is admin instead of design, the strategy falls apart. For hiring quality, this means roles get posted before anyone defines what success looks like. Descriptions are just copy-pasted from templates nobody ever checked. Requirements stack up for no reason. Entry-level jobs asking for 5 years of experience because it was already in the template. And I need to call something out here because I see this everywhere online. There's this popular take that companies are writing impossible job descriptions on purpose, as some kind of scheme to not hire or to justify bringing in cheaper labor. I see it on LinkedIn, I see it on TikTok, and I understand why people feel that way. From the outside, it really does feel deliberate, but I've never seen a company do that. Not once, in over 10 years across every size of organization, I've never seen someone deliberately overcomplicate a job description as part of some plan. What I have seen, every single time, is just incompetence. Someone in HR copied a template from SHRM, someone pulled the description off the internet, someone reused a posting from 3 years ago that was already wrong when it was written. Nobody analyzed the role, nobody defined success. I've rewritten employee handbooks for large organizations and found the original online, verbatim. Someone Googled employee handbook template, pasted it, put the logo on top, and called it done. Job descriptions get the exact same job treatment. There's a researcher named Capelli who documented this in 2012. He showed how overspecified descriptions systematically screen out qualified people. Not through malice, but through nobody owning the process. It just drifts. And from the outside, drift looks exactly like gatekeeping. That's what produces 1.8 million people searching for 6 months or more. Not a conspiracy, a process nobody designed and nobody owns. When I rebuild job descriptions from real analysis, tying each role to the strategy, defining outputs, matching requirements to what actually predicts success, the quality of applicants changes almost immediately. The posting finally describes a real job. And these problems follow people right through the door once they're hired. Unclear expectations, pay that doesn't move when your responsibilities grow, development that goes nowhere, promotions based on criteria nobody ever said out loud. Gallup's 2026 report found global employee engagement fell to 20%, its lowest level since the pandemic, costing the world economy an estimated $10 trillion in lost productivity. And that's not a typo, $10 trillion. The top drivers, unclear expectations, no development, and raw effort disconnected from reward. Leaders want to call those culture problems or generational attitude problems. They're design variables. When nobody designs them, people check out. The system stopped giving them anything to care about. Harder, Schmidt, and Hayes did a meta-analysis of nearly 8,000 business units and found direct links between engagement and productivity, customer satisfaction, and profitability. It's just math. I've seen companies where morale was gone, turnover was high, and leadership kept saying, "We just can't find good people anymore." That's always the story. Workforce problem, nobody wants to work, generational thing. And this is where I have a conversation I've had more times than I could count. I asked them, honestly, has there ever been a point in your career where you didn't give your best? Where you thought, screw this place and I'm not giving them more than I have to? Every time, every single time they say yes. And so I follow up. And I'm sure you wouldn't call yourself lazy, but the situation got you there. So why isn't that true for people you're calling lazy right now? And that conversation has never once gone badly. For years, I built accountability on teams where the easy tools most managers rely on just weren't available. I've led teams in the military, soldiers under contract, can't quit, can't be fired. I've managed truck drivers, couldn't offer raises, couldn't threaten termination because trucking companies are always hiring, and the threat means nothing. I've learned those drivers of behavior aren't needed and ultimately aren't effective. Without the HR strategic design, leadership is left without direction. This leads to poor management that isn't held accountable, which then leads to a toxic work environment where more responsibility lands on whoever can handle it. Their pay is stagnant with no title change even though they're holding everything together. Eventually, that person leaves or stops stepping up. Then, leadership calls it a culture problem. I've had sales leaders come to me wanting to fire and replace most of their team. I had to tell them, that's not an HR problem. That's a leadership problem. If you want to replace your whole team, the common denominator isn't them. When I looked at what was actually going on in those organizations, no documented expectations, no KPIs, comp hadn't been benchmarked in years, people taking on more responsibility with no change in pay, no development pathway, effort and outcome completely disconnected. People weren't disengaged because of attitude. The system gave them nothing to engage with. Once I rebuilt comp and put real performance frameworks in place, once people could see that what they did connected to what they got, the energy shifted. I removed the structural reasons they checked out. So let me bring this back to where we started. That tweet, that CEO saying HR just slows things down and creates a meaningless process. He's describing a symptom and calling it the disease. The HR he's experienced was hollowed out by decades of underinvestment, low barriers to entry, and executives who never understood what the function was supposed to do. He's looking at the results of his own decisions and blaming the department. Whether you're trying to get in the door or stuck once you're inside, the root cause is the same. A system that was never designed, run by people who weren't equipped to design it, inside organizations that didn't see the value in getting it right. Same pattern everywhere. Government, healthcare. People assume malice or conspiracy when the reality is nobody running the system was equipped to run it well. Conspiracies set out to explain why the ship is staring into the rocks. Meanwhile, nobody's staring at all. I've built systems that work. I've designed benefits packages that create enough savings to pay for the entire HR function. Turnover drops when you pay people what the role is worth, and they're more productive. I've held leaders accountable and designed a system that finally makes managers have the right conversations. It works, it's just increasingly rare. Because the expertise is rare. And organizations willing to invest in it, that's rarer. So here's what I'll leave you with. If you're job searching and something feels off, vague descriptions, requirements that don't make sense, a process nobody's running, trust that. You're not imagining it. Don't burn energy on conspiracy theories about why. Nobody designed it. Look for companies where someone did. You can tell. The description makes sense, the process is clear, the interviewers know what the role does. If you're an executive, ask your HR function one thing. Can you show me the return on our human capital investment? In numbers, not in head count, not training completions. If the answer is a blank stare, you don't have strategic HR. You have overhead with a title. And the research says that gap costs you $41,000 per employee in market value. If you're in HR, the difference between checking boxes and changing organizations is doing work most people don't know exists. The analytics, the modeling, the systems design. Be the person who does it. The profession needs it. And the whole workforce is paying the price for not having enough of us who do. If this made something click, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sources are in the description. I'm Clay. Thanks for watching.